You're watching the Newshour Agenda. I'm Padmaja Joshi. In a historic move, Seattle became the first city in America to ban caste discrimination. This after the Seattle City Council added caste to its anti-discrimination laws. The proposal made by council member Kshama Sawant was approved by a 6-1 vote on Tuesday and was hailed as a massive win for equality and dignity. But this has also come in for sharp criticism from Hindu Americans as a move to malign a specific community. In a charged atmosphere, the Hindu American Foundation wrote to Seattle City Attorney against the inclusion of caste in the non-discrimination policy and said that it unfairly singles out and targets an entire community on the basis of their national origin and ancestry for disparate treatment. They also called the move a negative implication of an entire ethnic minority, that is, people of Indian descent.
The law allows us to now speak, talk about things that are wrong. Without that, there's a fear of retaliation, and people do not want to talk about it. So which is why we consider this as a really big moment, because nowhere around the world such an ordinance has been passed outside of India.
The basis of the law itself is wrong. If you pass a law based on certain issues that happens. I wanted to know how many cases even registered or logged with the law enforcement in Seattle. There is none. Hearsay stories and fabricated stories from here and the data that was provided by dubious organizations like Equality Lab.
The present government should also learn from the city like Seattle that inspiration and acknowledging what Baba Sahib had been preaching and teaching. Present government in India, when they came into power in 2018, they diluted the act that was the law, Prevention of Atrocities Act.
It's not a sprint, it's a marathon. So we are here for the long haul, to make sure that we protect our...
In the United States is widespread. So it all boils down to this. Has the Seattle law taken a huge step in the direction of parity, or will it end up promoting prejudice?
You're watching the News Hour at 10, debate number 1 on Times Now, Super Prime Time.
All right, so let us take this straight across to our guest joining us now, Suraj Yengde, author, and Suhag Shukla from the Hindu American Foundation. She is the co-founder and ED of the foundation. Suraj Yengde, let me ask you first. You have hailed this as a very timely and good move. What was the need for a law like this to be brought in?
I think, Padmaja, we have to assess the history of South Asians in America. Since late 19th century, there has been arrival of Indians of various hues and colors and various languages. And ever since, and especially from 1905 onwards, there has been a surge within the white supremacist Republic of America for the Indian community to adjust. And what they did is effectively they provided a space for people to exist alongside their superior caste identity assimilated into the racialization. Now what that did was that created a certain archetype of a Indian, or so to say, South or a brown person. I mean, you know, the brown people are discriminated for wearing turbans, for practicing their faith and so forth. And it's not related to one faith, it's across. It's just what your nationality meant. And then what we have is down the line Civil Rights Act and post-Civil Rights Act. Many of the educated Indians who went to America to pursue various professional life and studies, they settled. And what we do is, like, we have seen experiences of deep caste-based uncertainties that existed in the community because it was operating as a hegemonic, homogeneous whole. But then there were also people who were from the marginalized oppressed caste who didn't have adequate space to express themselves and operate as equal because they had to assimilate and adjust because of the dominance of a certain character of what we have, a caste composition. And this by the way, is across the faith. It's not one faith. It's a multi-faith that's coming out of it, because caste has contaminated, of course, every other faith that we have seen from this land. And so this kind of experiences of marginalization has taken over several decades. And when we look at the history of late 19th century, 100 years later, today what it does is it bans, it outlaws. Nobody can now discriminate anybody by the virtue of what one would identify as caste.
But you're talking about, sorry to interrupt, but you're talking about individual experience. Is there any empirical data to show that there's a kind of discrimination that is so rampant that a law is needed to stop it?
Indeed. I mean, that's how any political process in America happens. You know, you have to have an empirical position, and there are multiple data who speak multiple languages and multiple, when I say languages, I don't mean to say linguistic as such, but multiple tones of what discrimination in this case is actually meant. And backing up with this empirical proposition, there have been many active civil liberty groups who have collected testimonials from within the public across the caste to really come out with a cogent proposal that this should not exist in a democratic society like America, that has a multiculturalism and multi-religious kind of faith-based recognition.
Okay. So, Suhag Shukla, one, this is not targeted at any one religion. Two, people have lived experience. Yet, why do you fear that this is only going to end up demonizing, in a way, Indians / more specifically the Hindu community?
So, first, let's just talk about the empirical data. The empirical data, there's one leading survey by the Carnegie Endowment for Peace that has surveyed 1,000 people of Indian American origin, and it found that while discrimination on the basis of national origin, color, religion, and gender were faced by at least 50% of the respondents, caste-based discrimination was exceedingly rare. We're talking about something less than 5%. Even 5%, I would argue, is one too many. But the point is that the way the American laws are set up to provide the broadest umbrella of protection against discrimination by using what's called facially neutral categories. That means that no particular group is then portrayed as inherently bigoted or inherently and always the perpetrator or inherently and always the victim. It's these facially neutral and generally applicable categories that have provided protection without demonizing any one group. Now, caste is a striking departure from that. From 6th grade onwards in this country, caste is taught as something that is inherent to Hinduism as well as to Indian society, and it presents Indian society in the most reductive manner possible, as if Indian society is divided into 4 groups with priests lording over it, and as if there's some sort of system that then is ossified in history from time immemorial. It presents Indian people as exceptionally bigoted, and it's beyond just religion. What the South Asian activists who have driven these policies don't realize is that they have scored a self-goal. What they have done is essentially demonized all South Asians as somehow being deeply problematic. Now, keep in mind, we are less than 2% of the American population, that now we need some special law that's going to ethnically profile us and police us in a manner that no other community is. And this means people of all caste backgrounds or none that will be seen as suspect as a result of these laws. The fact of the matter is that there were already categories like ancestry that have provided cover to other intra-community differences like tribe or clan amongst other ethnic communities. So this addition of caste is a striking departure from legal precedent.
We have no choice, Padmaja, unfortunately. For example, my experiences in America, in UK. In UK, I had like a Brahmin roommate assaulted me physically. And this is what happened in Birmingham. And I went to Birmingham police as a student. I was a law student. And when I went there, the police just told me, I was telling them that this was a hatred that was directed against me by a fellow Indian student who belonged to a Brahmin community, and I was a Dalit, and we had already established that. She couldn't do nothing about it. She just told me to just go back, because she couldn't figure out how to place this caste. It's not about imposition, it's about how one carries. It's our last name, Padmaja. Your last name, my last name connotes our caste location. We are not imposing upon it. We are carrying it without properly understanding and accounting to it.
Okay, so Suhag Shukla, affirmative action, what do you have to fear if you're doing nothing wrong?
I think this is obfuscating the issue. The example of men and women, the fact is that the way American laws work is that they say gender. That means if there is a man working in an all-female company and those women are creating a hostile environment for him, the equal protection laws provide that individual protection. They're not defining that women are only and always the victim and men are only and always the perpetrator. That is a key difference between how American laws work and how Indian laws work. Now, if Professor Yengde faced this sort of situation, I would be the first to come out and support him, because that law enforcement officer clearly doesn't understand the law. There is something called intra-community discrimination. Amongst African Americans, we see this, where light-skinned African Americans or dark-skinned African Americans oftentimes complain about being discriminated against by light-skinned African Americans. They don't have separate categories. It just falls under race or color. In that same way, if someone of Indian origin discriminates against Professor Yengde, or in the flip side, if Professor Yengde discriminates against someone else on the basis of their caste, the existing policies protect against that, because you are treating someone differently as a result of their ancestry. There's no presumption of higher or lower in the way American laws work.
But Suhag Shukla is saying there are already anti-discrimination.
Okay. Let me just say,
yes, come in.
Yeah, the reason in Cisco the investigator couldn't get around is because the evidence of discrimination is not there. You have two people who went to IIT, and one, the manager, who's being accused of caste-based discrimination, actively recruited this other classmate of his who self-identifies as Dalit or SC. If there was caste-based animus there, why would he have even recruited him? Not only that, but John Doe had a starting package of several $1 million in stock grants and was amongst one of the highest paid engineers at Cisco. The case is still pending. And the reason that we haven't seen anything 3 years down the line is because I think that the facts there are really shaky. So let's, and do we want to discourage that? So if the manager, who's from a different caste background, goes and recruits someone from SC, is that casteism? If Professor Yengde is tweeting that Hindus are sick people or that Brahmins are whatever else, is that casteism? Because the only one who's bringing up caste right now seems to be you. The Indian American community has transcended linguistic differences, other social background differences. They've built temples together, they've built community organizations together, and have peacefully coexisted, where these types of things are not relevant anymore.
Okay, finally answer this. Will this allegation of casteism cut both ways? If somebody says, oh, these people are dirty Brahmins, does that also qualify as caste discrimination and should be prosecuted?
Now, it's interesting, Padmaja, that Esquire Shukla is already predicting about the case of Cisco. I mean, I think her legal acumen will allow her to assess and look at the conditions before really...
It's based on the case filings. You can see it as public record available.
Before really coming out. And by the way, the comment on Hindus as sick people of India came from Dr. Ambedkar's Annihilation of Caste, which was, of course, one of the monumental treatises that's now taught across the world. And now, going back to the idea of caste, what we need to understand, it's a graded hierarchy, and it exists among, and I'll tell you an example of a Muslim woman from Hyderabad who I met, who is in Massachusetts. And she had a very difficult life because, of course, there were caste differences between her and the in-laws. And, of course, she had to seek divorce. But the case for her was not just about getting a divorce from her partner, from her husband, ex-husband. It was also about what biradari they belonged to. So it's not just about the case of it's applying to a Hindu community or Indian community. What we need to also understand is caste cuts across the disciplines of what we today identify as ethnic backgrounds. It could also, there are 170 organizations that have supported this, and it has really, sailed through. What necessarily applies is that if one is discriminating against another community, and that doesn't matter whichever rank they belong to, is equally accountable.
No. So again, I will come back to my original question. Will it also be considered casteism if somebody says that you are a bigoted Brahmin or you are a dirty Hindu? Yes. Does that also count as casteist behavior?
No, it will. It will because American law does not presume oppressor status or oppressed status. That is something that is unique to Indian law. So all of the, so many of the activists that were promoting this, I mean, at the steps of City Hall, they are engaging in hateful rhetoric about one community. If they are employers or if they are business owners and they continue to engage in that sort of rhetoric and a guest from that particular background comes in, yes, absolutely, they would have a grounds for filing a complaint. But the fact is that you wouldn't have needed caste as a category to file that complaint because Seattle city law already bans ancestry-based discrimination. So what is ancestry? Ancestry is your background, your social background. So it's already covered without targeting all South Asians. Now South Asians are going to be looked at, regardless of religion, as suspect and inherently bigoted. You have drawn attention to 2% of our community and made us even further otherized than we already were in a majority country.
Final question I'm going to ask you. In addition to the caricaturization that she's talking about and being looked at with suspicion, largely there has been a sort of image of upper caste Hindus, smash Brahminical patriarchy, of perpetuating a certain kind of anti-women attitudes, anti-minority, anti-Dalit. Is this not going to accentuate that caricaturization?
I think, Padmaja, see, first thing first, we should not, again, what our fellow opponents are doing, unfortunately, is they're equating caste with South Asia, which is really looking at how caste is visualized through their own self. Now, if you come to our part of the world, that works very differently, right? And so what has been held as a synonym to caste is looked at within a certain Savarna caste people who are afraid. Because if you're talking about Hindus, it's not just Savarna Hindus. There are people across caste who practice Hindus, the backward caste and various people from various hierarchies within the caste system. So does it happen, you see that in Sikh community. You see the separate churches that are also operate also in America. So does you see what happens within the Muslim community. Now, let me tell you, it is to all other groups except the Vishwa Hindu Parishad and the nationalist rhetorics that are operating as an outshoot of this government that are operating there in the US are the ones who are protesting. But the Muslim groups...
Because they fear being singled out.
No, but the Muslim groups who also stand a chance if it is the Sikh groups, the Christian groups have not opposed this.
Suhag Shukla, why aren't Sikhs and Muslims opposing?
Why? Because they are part of a nexus of anti-Hindu activism. You bring up the current government, I'm sorry, but the Prime Minister comes from an OBC background. The current President comes from a Dalit background. The former President comes from an SD background. So this idea of trying to present Hindus as somehow fragile or opposing this policy because we want to continue to discriminate, I think is obfuscating the facts. Now, if you look at who's engaging in all these activities, they're the same people who attack Hindus routinely and who deny
Who are Hindus for you? Professor Yengde is asking, who are Hindus for you?
Who are Hindus for me? Anyone who identifies as a Hindu. Anyone who believes in religious pluralism, who believes that every individual has inherent divinity within them and that we are meant to transcend these outward differences and treat one another with compassion and dignity.
Hindus
that
for
is a
Human
Hindu.
Rights Group.
Hindus for Human Rights Group. Those Hindus are also Hindus. And they're opposed to you?
Yeah, they're Hindus. I have never said that they're not Hindus, but they are sadly mistaken in promoting a law that now asks Seattle administrators, one of the whitest cities, by the way, in the United States, to now police brown people. That is the end result of this law. And it's not going to matter whether you're Dalit or Brahmin or Rajput or whatever else. It doesn't matter. We have now put a target on all brown people of all religious backgrounds. And as far as equating caste with South Asia, it's not the opponents who are doing it. It's the council member who did it. It's public school textbooks who do it. It's the media that does it. So in order to try to fix the amendment, because it was targeting South Asians, what did Council Member Sawant do? She also added Southeast Asians and African communities. And so all these new communities have been added to the exclusion of white European people. Let's keep a perspective on this. You have targeted people on the basis of their color and immigrant status.
You know, I sympathize with the emotion of Esquire Shukla, because she's somebody who is born and brought up in America, and she's of course proud of her heritage. She's of course proud of her background and ancestors, and she has to, because she lives in a white Christian dominated republic where her minority status makes her vulnerable. Now I understand that emotion. Now what she's mistaken with that is not everything that comes from her heritage land or ancestry has to be a 24 karat. There is also a lot of complicated story that comes with this kind of narrative and espousing of our. Now, if it is maintained, now we have to understand caste cuts across. Caste is not just Hindu. When it comes to caste, is basically a structure that has a strict hierarchy where occupational status is maintained by the womb that your mother gives you, the identity, and you carry it along through your birth to death. Now, when you come to South Asia, it becomes Brahminical, and in modern context, Brahminical Hindu caste system. If you go to Africa, there are now, if you go to Nigeria, there is a caste system within Igbo land. If you go to Kenya, there is a Wata caste system. If you go to Senegal, there is another caste system. So in Japan, there are Burakumin people. So caste as a hierarchical system does exist. So what we need to understand that there are people who are outcast, who do not have the same right and dignity, irrespective that the constitutional values protect you. They don't filter down to these communities because they are so marginalized that we need to create additional protection mechanism. And I think if they are really committed to the values of Hindu and the dharma that really sees other person as sentient, as being that we need to protect and we need to support, what we would like to see is that the privileged people would forego and give us the commitment that what they have done is for in the service of the marginalized. And you will not see the people who are opposed, who want caste are the people who are victims of caste, Padmaja. These are not the people who are privileged of caste. And the lobbying that we have seen within the Ambedkarite groups that we have seen, Ambedkar International Center, Ambedkar International Mission, Ambedkar King Studies, these are all Ambedkarite groups, and these are the people who have gone there, who have collected, who have put their heart out, bringing their children.
No, but is it entirely fair to say that people who are opposing this particular legislation are pro-casteism? There are people who are saying that while any violence or discrimination is abhorrent and must be opposed, this is broad stroke generalization and painting people in a certain way. Anyhow, our dharma, as it were, was to put out both points of view in front of you. How this is going to have a rollover effect, if at all, we'll be keeping a close watch. For the time being, though, thank you very much, Suhag Shukla and Professor Suraj Yengde, for joining me here.